So you've spent like 4 years in high school memorizing French verb
Oh,
conjugations.
yeah, standard experience.
Right. And you aced every flashcard test. You know exactly how to turn a regular verb into the past tense on paper. But then, the second you step up to the counter at a Parisian cafe to order, like a simple coffee, your brain just flatlines.
Completely freezes up.
Exactly. You open your mouth and absolutely nothing comes out. Why does that happen? Well, welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're unpacking a really fascinating stack of methodology notes that completely upends how we think about learning a second
It
language.
really does.
It's called the Neuro-Linguistic Approach, or the NLA. And our mission today is to figure out why this brain-first approach might be the fix we've all been waiting for.
Yeah, because it essentially looks at that exact moment of freezing up at the cafe and asks, okay, what is happening in the neurology of the brain right now? And how do we design a methodology to bypass that roadblock entirely?
Because it really is a roadblock.
Oh, absolutely. And the key thing to remember here is that the freezing you experience, it isn't a personal failing.
Right.
You aren't just bad at languages. It's actually a systemic failing of how you were taught.
I love that.
Yeah.
Let's get right into the mechanics of that failure then. Because for decades, the prevailing theory in language education was built on this massive, unquestioned assumption.
The pipeline assumption.
Yeah, exactly. The idea was always, like, teach the rules explicitly. The teacher stands at the whiteboard, explains the architecture of a sentence, has you memorize the vocabulary list, and the assumption is that eventually, through sheer repetition, that conscious rule-following will just magically transform into unconscious natural speaking.
Right. They assumed a direct pipeline. You pour explicit grammar rules into the top of the funnel, and implicit fluency eventually just flows out the bottom.
Which makes sense on paper, right?
It does, but neurological studies show us that this pipeline literally does not exist.
Right.
Yeah, the brain does not have a mechanism to convert explicit knowledge about a language into the implicit skill of speaking it under pressure. They are stored in two entirely distinct, physically unconnected neural compartments.
So you're talking about declarative memory versus procedural memory here.
Exactly. Declarative memory is your database of facts. It is the vocabulary lists, the rules of syntax, the historical dates you memorized in school.
It's knowledge about things.
Yes. Whereas procedural memory, on the other hand, is the automated cognitive and motor skill to actually do something in real time without having to consciously think about the individual steps.
This is where I always think about learning how to ride a bicycle.
Oh, that's the perfect analogy.
Right. Because it is like trying to learn how to ride a bike by sitting in a classroom and reading a dense physics textbook.
Good luck with that.
Seriously. You could sit there and memorize the declarative rules of gravity, momentum, gyroscopic forces, and the exact angle of balance required to stay upright. You can get an A+ on the physics exam.
But the moment you actually get on the pedals,
Exactly. Your procedural memory, the part of your brain that fires the muscles to keep you from eating pavement, it has absolutely no idea what to do with that physics information. The textbook knowledge does not translate into the physical skill.
and if we apply that back to your cafe scenario, you can see the neurological mechanics of why the freeze happens.
Walk us through it.
So you walk up to the barista, the social pressure hits, your brain suddenly needs procedural memory to coordinate your vocal cords, retrieve the vocabulary, and structure the sentence instantly.
But you don't have any.
Right, because you only ever studied flashcards, your procedural memory for French is completely empty. So your brain panics and tries to access your declarative memory, which is the physics textbook.
It tries to manually build the sentence using rules. Like, okay, the subject is I, the verb is to want, it's a regular ER verb, so drop the R.
And by the time you've manually calculated that conjugation in your head, the barista is looking at you like you have two heads.
The line behind you is sighing.
Yeah, your stress levels spike, the anxiety shuts down your cognitive processing even further, and you are just trapped.
It's a total shutdown. Which is why the neurolinguistic approach argues that we have to bypass that physics textbook entirely.
Entirely. We have to stop stuffing the declarative memory full of rules and instead design classrooms that exclusively target and build the procedural memory first. You basically have to just get people on the bike.
But how do you practically do that in a classroom? Because, I mean, you can't just put 30 adults in a room, point at them, and say, speak.
No, it would be chaos.
Right, there has to be a structure.
Yeah.
And the NLA uses a very rigid sequence to build this procedural memory. It's called the literacy loop.
Yes, the literacy loop. And the order is strictly oral, then reading, then writing, and then back to oral. It never deviates.
Never.
Never. The oral phase must always be the foundation. If you are going to introduce a reading text, you never just hand out the paper. You have a robust oral discussion to contextualize the concepts first. And then when it's time to write, you do an oral pre-writing phase. And the entire loop finishes with students reading each other's written texts, which sparks, of course, more oral discussion.
But wait, let me play devil's advocate here.
Yeah.
If we look at modern classrooms, almost all of them prioritize speaking.
Sure.
The communicative approach has been around for ages. Having a chat before reading a book isn't exactly revolutionary. I feel like every modern language teacher wants their students talking as much as possible.
It is a really common misconception to group the NLA in with standard communicative approaches. Some researchers actually made that exact assumption early on.
Oh, really?
Yeah, but the underlying goal of the NLA's oral phase is fundamentally different. In a standard classroom, speaking is often used to practice the declarative rules you just learned on the whiteboard.
Oh, I see.
But in the NLA, the oral first sequence is used to establish an internal unconscious grammar. You are forging the procedural pathways from scratch before any text is ever introduced to the eye.
Because the moment you introduce text too early, you sabotage the procedural memory.
Exactly.
I was reading about this idea of a visual virus that happens when we see written words before we've established their sounds orally.
The visual virus, yes. It's such a good term.
Think about a native English speaker trying to learn French. If you show them the written French word for bird, oiseau, spelled O-I-S-E-A-U, before they've internalized how it actually sounds,
Oh, it's over.
their English-trained brain immediately tries to decode those letters using English phonetic rules.
And they end up pronouncing it oico.
Right.
Their brain hard codes that incorrect phonetic pathway. They've caught the visual virus, and they will spend the next 5 years of their language journey trying to consciously unlearn that specific mistake.
But if they had spent a week only hearing and speaking the word oiseau in conversation, their procedural memory would have mapped the sound perfectly to the concept of a bird.
Precisely. By the time they finally see the letters O-I-S-E-A-U in the reading phase of the literacy loop, their brain already owns the sound.
The bizarre spelling just becomes a quirky secondary fact, rather than the primary blueprint for how to say it.
That is the brilliance of the rigid loop. You force the brain to build the procedural network first, relying entirely on the ear and the mouth. You establish the internal grammar. Only once that foundation is rock solid do you map the visual tasks of reading and writing onto it.
This actually brings us to what might be the most jarring, controversial rule in the entire methodology.
I know exactly what you're going to say.
Because yes, speaking is the foundation. But what you are allowed to speak about is heavily policed.
Yes, it is.
The NLA completely forbids simulations, role plays, and collective repetition in the classroom.
It basically eliminates the bread and butter of traditional language teaching.
Yeah. No pretending to buy a train ticket in Paris. No acting out a scene at a restaurant where one student is the waiter and the other is the customer.
None of it.
But why? I mean, play and imagination are the foundations of human learning. Kids learn almost everything by pretending. They play house, they play doctor, they pretend to be astronauts. Why is language acquisition suddenly an exception to the rule of play?
Well, because children playing house are actually engaging in authentic social positioning with their peers. They're negotiating real power dynamics, real rules, and real relationships in the sandbox.
Oh, that makes sense.
But a 30-year-old in a classroom pretending to be a Parisian ticket agent isn't negotiating anything real. Neurological studies show us that the brain only retains new language structures when it is focused on the meaning of a message, not the form.
Meaning over form.
Right. If you don't actually need a train ticket, the meaning is hollow. The brain recognizes the simulation and categorizes the exercise as a declarative performance. You're reciting lines in a play, not communicating a true need.
You're not authentically trying to transmit an idea from your brain into someone else's brain. You're just trying to get the grammar right to please the teacher.
Exactly. Which is why the creators of the NLA insist that motivation and actual retention peak when learners talk about themselves.
Their real lives.
Yes, their real lives, their real opinions, their real weekends. When you speak your own truth, it guarantees the message is authentic.
There's a cognitive psychology principle at play here too, right? Transfer appropriate processing, or TAP.
Yes, TAP. It demonstrates that for a learned skill to successfully transfer to a real-world situation, The cognitive environment of the practice must closely match the real-world environment.
Think of it like training for a rugged, muddy mountain marathon. By only ever running on a perfectly flat indoor treadmill in an air-conditioned gym.
Right.
Your legs might be making the same basic running motions, but your brain is processing a highly stable, predictable, safe environment.
And then you hit the actual mountain.
Exactly. With its rocks, slipping mud, and unpredictable elevation. Your brain doesn't know how to micro-adjust your ankles. The skill doesn't transfer. Pretending to buy a train ticket in a classroom where you know there are no real stakes, that is the linguistic treadmill.
That's a great way to put it. To prepare for the mountain of real conversation, the classroom practice has to involve real, unpredictable human interaction. You have to stumble over expressing a real thought to a real person.
But wait, if I'm stumbling through a real conversation about my weekend and I'm just making a total mess of the past tense, the NLA has another wild rule for the teacher.
Oh, the no correction rule.
Yes. They are strictly forbidden from correcting me live. No jumping in to fix my verb conjugations mid-sentence.
Because correcting a student mid-sentence destroys the authenticity of the interaction.
How so?
Well, imagine you are telling a close friend a deeply personal, emotional story about your family, and right at the climax of the story, they stop you and say, actually, you used the wrong preposition there.
I would be furious. I'd probably just stop talking to them entirely.
It completely shatters the social contract, and the NLA leans heavily on social development theories, specifically the idea that peer interaction is the primary engine of learning. The goal is to keep the social interaction alive and flowing.
But the teacher just sits there smiling while I butcher the French past tense. Aren't I just going to permanently bake in terrible habits? I mean, how do I actually improve if nobody points out I'm wrong?
I know, it seems incredibly counterintuitive. But studies actually show that unjudged social interaction increases both the quantity and the quality of what linguists call intake.
Intake.
Yeah, intake is the language that your brain actively processes and permanently retains, as opposed to input, which just kind of washes over you.
Okay, that distinction is huge.
It is. When the stress of being evaluated is removed, your affective filter lowers. Your brain stops panicking. It becomes highly receptive.
So you're saying I'll learn more when I'm relaxed.
Exactly. You naturally start to implicitly absorb the correct structures being used by the teacher and your peers over time, simply because you are deeply, genuinely engaged in the meaning of the conversation. The procedural memory corrects itself through massive, authentic exposure rather than explicit scolding.
So if there are no red pens, no pop quizzes on verb endings, and no live corrections, how on earth does anyone know if this is working? How do you measure progress without a standardized grammar test?
Well, you have to fundamentally redefine what it means to be good at a language. The NLA splits success into two distinct categories: accuracy and fluency. And their definitions for these terms are much broader than what we typically use.
Right, because when I hear accuracy, I think, okay, 0 grammatical mistakes. But the NLA definition breaks accuracy into 2 layers. There is linguistic accuracy, sure. Your verbs agree and your sentence structure is sound. But there is also pragmatic accuracy.
Pragmatic accuracy is key. It's your ability to use those rules correctly in the right social context.
Right.
You might construct a grammatically flawless sentence, but if you use highly informal, intimate slang while addressing a judge in a courtroom, you are wildly inaccurate in your communication.
That makes total sense.
Yeah.
So accuracy is the sum of knowing the rules and knowing the social boundaries of those rules.
Exactly. And then there's fluency, which they define as the capacity to link all of those elements, the grammar, the vocabulary, the social context, smoothly in real time under the pressure of a live conversation.
And to measure this, the NLA uses a specialized oral interview protocol.
Yes, they score students on a 25-point scale. It places them somewhere between level 1, which is essentially just stringing isolated words together, all the way up to level 5, which means you are fully capable of interacting seamlessly with native speakers in complex scenarios.
And the way they score these interviews contains one of those fascinating insights I've ever heard about language learning.
The hesitations.
Yes. Because when we picture a fluent speaker, we picture someone talking at 1,000,000 miles an hour, never taking a breath, never saying, but in this methodology, Hesitations, pauses, and even repeating syllables are not necessarily penalized. In fact, a pause can actually be a sign of incredibly high fluency.
It really can, but it requires an incredible amount of nuance from the evaluator. You have to determine why the student is pausing.
Right.
If your procedural memory is simply failing to retrieve a basic noun like you are staring at the ceiling for 10 seconds trying to remember the word for apple, that is a breakdown in fluency. The cognitive stream has stopped.
That's the painful deer in the headlights pause.
Exactly. But imagine you are deep in a conversation and you pause because you are structuring a highly complex, nuanced thought.
Like you're weighing the cultural implications of what you want to say.
Yes. You're scanning your mental toolbox for the exact right idiom and adjusting your tone to be perfectly polite. That type of hesitation pausing, because you have so many tools at your disposal and you are taking a split second to select the perfect combination, that demonstrates a masterful level of fluency. You
Wow.
are managing multiple sophisticated cognitive streams at once.
So you aren't pausing because your toolbox is empty. You're pausing because you're inspecting a massive inventory.
Exactly.
But how could a teacher possibly distinguish between those two types of pauses live in the moment?
Yeah.
I mean, you can't read a student's mind to know if they forgot the word for apple or if they are contemplating cultural nuance.
You can't, which is exactly why the evaluation protocol strictly dictates that these interviews must be recorded.
Oh, that makes sense.
Yeah, evaluators are not allowed to score them live. They sit down later, listen back to the audio, and carefully analyze the nature of the pauses, the complexity of the clauses surrounding the hesitation, and the overall pragmatic flow.
That protects the student too.
Yeah.
It means during the actual conversation, the evaluator is just being a human being,
Right. They are engaging authentically.
maintaining eye contact and reacting to the story rather than squinting at a clipboard trying to diagnose the origin of a stutter.
It perfectly aligns with the core philosophy, which is to prioritize authentic communication above all else.
It's just a total paradigm shift. Let's take a step back and look at the whole picture here.
Hmm.
We started with that universally painful moment of freezing up at the Parisian cafe.
A feeling we all know too well.
Yeah. And we've uncovered that the traditional way we've been taught to avoid that freeze by memorizing more rules actually just builds up a declarative physics textbook in our minds that our procedural speaking brain can't even read.
Right. We need to build the procedural memory first. And that requires the strict discipline of the literacy loop, always prioritizing the ear and the mouth before the eye to avoid that visual virus.
And it demands that we abandon the linguistic treadmill of fake role plays.
Yes, and embrace the messy, unpredictable terrain of authentic human interaction.
No fake train tickets, no live corrections mid-sentence, just real people talking about their real lives. And in doing so, we redefine fluency entirely. We realize that a thoughtful pause isn't a failure. It's the sound of a complex brain doing complex work.
And that gets to the absolute core of why this matters. We don't learn languages just to pass written exams. We learn them to connect with other human beings.
Absolutely.
The ultimate goal of the neurolinguistic approach is to help learners experience the genuine pleasure of interacting in a new language. When you remove the constant threat of correction and the artificiality of pretending to be someone else, you bring the joy and the humanity back to communication.
The pleasure of interacting. I love that. It shouldn't feel like a high-stakes tightrope walk every time you open your mouth. It should just feel like connection.
Precisely.
Which brings me to a final thought I want to leave you with. We spent this whole time looking at how the brain categorizes our learning into two completely separate buckets: knowing the rules and actually doing the thing.
The physics book versus the bicycle.
Right. And how dangerous it is to confuse the two. So it makes me wonder, where else in your life are you stubbornly rereading the manual, memorizing the physics, and hoping for a breakthrough, when what you really need to do is just get on the bike, accept the fact that you might wobble, and start pedaling?